Nobody wants to go into the federal prison system, but if you are going in right now, you should know that there's never been a better time to begin working toward a self-advocacy campaign. And today I'm going to demonstrate why I am saying it's important to build a record that will help you advocate for yourself by going over a proposed rule change that will take place throughout the Bureau of Prisons. So if you want to visit us at prisonprofessors.com, you could go to the advocacy page. I think it's on the top, it's on the top of the menu bar under resources. You will see a section there called advocacy, and it will take you to this menu. I am Michael Santos, by the way, and I'm going to be reading this information for people who prefer to get their content while they're driving down the roads through an iTunes podcast, or they can watch it on YouTube, on our YouTube channel, or of course, I'm always steering them back to our webpage where they can get this information for free. It's kind of our mission to try and improve outcomes for justice-impacted people who are going through the system. And that's what we're going to do today by showing you this first article here that I wrote early this morning. Today is June the 19th, Sunday. Happy Father's Day, by the way. I would like to share this article with you, and it's on the proposed rule on home confinement and CARES Act. So I think that I'll be able to share that. Yes, I can share my screen completely, and I am going to read as I go along. So on June the 14th, 2022, Attorney General Merrick Garland proposed a rule that would authorize the Bureau of Prisons directors more discretion regarding home confinement. Now, the proposed rule concerns people that went to home confinement under the CARES Act. The rule is open for public comment until July 21st, 2022. After July 21st, 2022, the Bureau of Prisons and the Department of Justice will review the comments and issue a final rule. The final rule becomes the law that the BOP will follow. Now, on the website, and I always give more commentary than what shows there, but on the website, you will see a series of buttons in case you want to download the PDF, or you may want to download a copy of the support letter that I sent to the Bureau of Prisons expressing support for this rule change. As I encourage other people to do, there are instructions if you just click the link there. And of course, I provide a link where you can download a PDF of this page if you've got a loved one in prison and you want to share it with them. So below, I offer 25 points showing why I think the proposed rule indicates that the Bureau of Prisons is moving in the right direction. It should be clear that I am offering these thoughts from the perspective of a person that served multiple decades in federal prison. Each person should read the proposed rule and draw his or her own conclusions. During my tenure in prison, I saw many changes. Leaders in the Bureau of Prisons require many months and sometimes years to roll out changes that influence operations across the entire agency. When Congress passed legislation that resulted in the RDAP program, for example, the BOP rolled the program out slowly. Many changes have occurred since RDAP started, including how the BOP administered time cuts. Similarly, when President Bush signed the Second Chance Act, the Bureau of Prisons interpreted the act differently than it does today. Changes take place over time. With the First Step Act, we saw significant changes with a new focus on the importance of preparing people for success upon release. Before the First Step Act, the BOP trained its staff to focus on preserving security, and it didn't put as much emphasis on the responsibility of preparing people for success upon release. The Bureau of Prisons has been slow to roll out the benefits of the First Step Act for several reasons, including, one, Congress required the agency to create a risk assessment tool that required more than a year to complete. And I provide other content on that pattern risk assessment tool in other areas of our website. Two, the pandemic interfered with the rollout of programs that could lead to earned time credits. And I would recommend everybody really understand the nuances of earned time credits. Later this week, incidentally, I will be interviewing an individual who has more than 25 years experience of working in the Bureau of Prisons. He used to lead the home confinement and halfway house system across the country. So we'll get a lot of great insight from that interview, and we will publish that on the subject matter expert section of our page. And the third reason that it's been slow to roll out, that the Bureau of Prisons has been slow to roll out the First Step Act, is because the agency is massive. It has to train more than 36,000 staff members to think differently about reentry. Now, the First Step Act represents the most significant reform legislation since the 1994 Comprehensive Crime Control Act. It influences every person in federal prison. Every person in federal prison should therefore understand how changes in BOP policy can affect release dates and many other things. So let's talk about the First Step Act and self-advocacy. The more a person understands the system, the more effectively a person can engineer a self-advocacy program. With the First Step Act, self-advocacy has become more critical than ever. People that document their preparations well may advance their candidacy for home confinement. Now, the First Step Act puts us in a different era than the one that led us to mass incarceration. But years are going to pass before the BOP fully implements the will of Congress. Still, I'm encouraged by what I read in the proposed rule change. Now, in the end, we don't know how the new director will lead, and we don't know what guidance the Department of Justice will give her, assuming, of course, when I say her, that the position is going to go to Colette Peters, as I wrote about her previously in a different blog, and you can find that on the blog section of prisonprofessors.com. Now, everyone should remember that politicians and prosecutors do not want to release people who will commit more crimes or who risk assessments suggest will commit more crimes. Again, that bolsters the reason why people need to be building strong self-advocacy programs. And to continue with the reading, for this reason, people should build records showing why they are likely to lead law-abiding lives. The more a person memorializes a positive adjustment strategy, the more effective a person will become in persuading BOP administrators to recommend home confinement at the earliest possible time. Based on the language in the proposed rule, leaders may move closer toward authorizing low-risk people opportunities to serve more extended periods of home confinement. Now, what is a low-risk person? That is going to, they're going to assess who a low-risk person is based on how that person scores on those risk assessment tools. But the wording in this proposed rule that the Federal Register publishes, it follows. The Bureau of Prisons has expertise to manage people in home confinement. So these are just things that I'm concluding from reading that proposed rule change. People that go to home confinement are more likely to integrate with society successfully than if they were to remain in secure prisons longer. The First Step Act authorizes broad use of home confinement, and Congress intends for the Bureau of Prisons to use its discretion to improve reentry outcomes. Broader use of home confinement would lower costs for the Bureau of Prisons. Those are the bullet points. Now, again, a little side commentary. Although the First Step Act authorizes the Bureau of Prisons to release people to more home confinement, that doesn't mean that all the staff members are exercising their authority or the discretion in the way that Congress intended, which is to send more people to home confinement and to leave them there. This rule really applies to that. I'm just showing you why, if you're going into that system, you've got to be thinking, I'm always going to have to advocate for myself, and I need to make it easier for other people to advocate for me. I need to make it easier for the staff members to recommend me for home confinement at the soonest possible time. Now, earlier this morning, I submitted a letter to the Bureau of Prisons expressing our support, strong support for the rule change. And I encourage you to do the same. We believe that proposed rule change will be a great step toward improving opportunities for people to spend more time on home confinement. Again, this is a long rollout, so don't think it's today's Sunday, June 19th, that we're going to see more people going next week. There's a lot that's got to roll out. But I was a person, while I served those 26 years, of always thinking about how am I going to advocate for myself, and that's what I encourage the participants of our Prison Professors program to do as well. Now, by expanding the director's discretion to use home confinement as a resource, the Bureau of Prisons will accomplish many goals that serve the interests of taxpayers. And here are the bullet point lists. The proposed rule will incentivize people in prison to engage in protective activities. Likewise, it's going to encourage them to avoid disruptive activities. It's going to encourage people in prison to document the efforts to reconcile with society and prepare for law-abiding lives upon release. It's going to offer hope to people in prison that they can build upon, encouraging them to demonstrate why they are worthy candidates to go to home confinement earlier. The proposed rule will lower costs for the Bureau of Prisons. It's going to improve morale among staff members because they're not only going to be warehousing people, and it's going to allow the Bureau of Prisons to collect more data that shows why the agency can increase public safety by transitioning people to home confinement based on individual assessments. So the background information to the proposed rule also confirms that the BOP has broad discretion on when to send a person to home confinement. Earlier, BOP memorandums suggested that qualified people serving longer than 18-month sentences may be appropriate for confinement after they served 50% of the sentence imposed. And people that were serving sentences of 18 months or less would be appropriate for transfer to home confinement after they served only 25% of the sentence. So that's what the current memorandums say. But my interpretation of the language in the proposed rule, and you're going to have to read your own, it suggests that those percentages were only guidelines. So with the First Step Act, the BOP director has broad discretion, and the director may authorize the BOP to transfer people to home confinement when such a transfer would serve the best interest of justice. Of course, BOP has already kind of made a hard line that says that 25% for people with 18 sentences of 18 months or less, and 50% for people with sentences of longer than 18 months, which is way better than when I served my sentence. But my interpretation is that they've got much broader discretion. And if a person builds a great case, that person may succeed in getting a better outcome and even getting to home confinement sooner. So there's a lot that has to happen. I mean, we have to get a director appointed that believes in this pathway. This rule has to become final. But I can tell you, this is a step in the right direction. Now, statistics suggest that recidivism rates will drop if the Bureau of Prisons incentivizes people to build post-conviction records that will allow them to transition to home confinement earlier. Below, I offer 25 bullet points from the proposed rule that I highlighted. And again, readers should read the entire proposed rule on their own, just as I did. Now, did I read everything here? I think so. Let's see. So here's where we would get into those 25 different bullet points. And let me just show you where to find them. You can read them, of course, here because I've just summarized them. But if you scroll to the top of this page, you will see that you could download the actual proposed rule right there, and you could actually see it. You could also, if you're sending it to somebody in prison, you just click that. You just click this link right here, and it will take you to the PDF of this document. I don't know if I can show it to you on the screen. Let me see. I'm going to have to move that over. So let's see if I can use my little computer skills there so that you can see it. There's the PDF, and I will try to read from the PDF now. So let me scroll down to the bottom of the PDF so that you could see the section that I highlighted. So see, there's the actual rule published in the Federal Register, and you see where I highlighted it this morning in preparation of this article that I wanted to share with as many people as possible. I would encourage you to read this document. I'm just going to read the bullet points that I highlighted here, and you can determine what you think is relevant. So I'll read them, and I'll tell you why it's relevant, in my view. So the CARES Act authorized the director of the Bureau of Prisons to lengthen the time a prisoner may be placed on home confinement beyond the statutory maximum normally allowed under 18 U.S.C. 3624C2. So now the director, that CARES Act gave the director a lot more authority. And then bullet point 2 just kind of codifies the following guidelines from the Attorney General. The director has exercised its discretion under the CARES Act to place thousands of people on home confinement. Number 3, very few of the people that the director placed on home confinement under the CARES Act have committed new crimes. I give those statistics a little later. Number 4, although the CARES Act plainly states that the director's authority to lengthen the maximum period of home confinement exists during the COVID emergency period. The act was silent about what happens to people once the COVID period ended. So that's really the purpose of this rule. The Bureau of Prisons is trying to get that discretion so that people can stay home. And of course, when the Attorney General is making the proposed rule change, there's a very good chance it's going to happen. Number 5, the only people that are going to oppose this are people that want to perpetuate this era of mass incarceration. Number 5 aligns with the Bureau's consistent position that the more appropriate reading of the statute is to permit the Bureau to conduct an individualized assessment. So that's really important in my view, because that's really what you want, is you want to be able to differentiate yourself from other people in prison. You want to show why you're a great candidate for relief. Number 6, the department's interpretation of the statute is also consistent with the congressional support for increasing the use of home confinement as part of a reentry programming. And of course, they're citing this, both the Second Chance Act and the First Step Act as support for their statement. Number 7, and again, these numbers are my numbers. They're not the proposed rule numbers. Indeed, there is evidence that the Bureau can appropriately manage public safety concerns related to inmates in home confinement, and there are penological, rehabilitative, and societal benefits of allowing inmates to effectively prepare for life after the conclusion of their criminal sentences. Again, this is key information for somebody that wants to architect a self-directed self-advocacy program. If I were still in prison, I would be using that, and I would be building a record that shows why my behavior and the work that I am doing advances my candidacy for relief. Number 8, for all of the reasons the department proposes to provide the director with express authority. So what it's just saying there, that they don't want his discretion to lapse after the CARES Act. They want to have it codified that the director will have authority to determine on an individual basis when a person is ready for home confinement. The FSA, First Step Act, established earned time credits with eligible inmates that they could accrue through participating in recidivism reducing programs, and then apply for transfers to pre-release custody, including home confinement, without regard to the time frame set forth in 18 U.S.C. 3624C2, right? So, under that Second Chance Act, remember, people were only allowed to go to home confinement for the last 10% of their sentence, or 6 months, whichever is less. On March 27th, 2020, President Trump signed the CARES Act, and of course that expanded that authority. Number 11, the director of the BOP agreed that he could lengthen the maximum amount of time for which the director is authorized to place a person under home confinement under Section 3624C2 of Title 18. Important takeaway again there. Although the BOP is authorized to let more people out, a lot of people don't get it. That's why a person has to become really skilled at self-advocacy. They have to understand the First Step Act. They have to understand the CARES Act. They have to understand what rights they have. And more importantly, they have to understand how to put a package together that will advance them as a candidate for success. Number 12, according to the Bureau, as of March 24th, a small percentage of people placed on home confinement pursuant to the CARES Act reoffended. Out of 9,500 people, only 350 people went back to prison for disciplinary violations, and only 8 returned for new criminal conduct. That means that 96% of the people didn't go back to prison, and that's a really telling statistic, I think, and it's one of the reasons I feel so optimistic that we're going to see changes as more data comes in. Of course, every individual has to do his part to prepare for a law-abiding, contributing life. Number 13, this data suggests that people placed on longer-term home confinement under the CARES Act can be and have been successfully managed with only a limited number of requiring a return to custody for disciplinary reasons. Number 14, for all the reasons set forth, so the department proposes to promulgate the rulemaking under the Attorney General's authority, blah, blah, blah. So what that's saying is that, it's the director, it's the Bureau of Prisons with the Attorney General together that are arguing, hey, give us more authority to send more people to home confinement for longer periods of time. They're saying that the Bureau of Prisons, based on the person's individualized adjustment, it's staff members in the BOP that are in the best position to assess whether some home confinement is appropriate. Section number 15, or bullet point 15, again, we're giving authority with what the CARES Act authorized the Bureau to do. Number 16, now we're talking about the OLC, that's the Office of Legal Counsel of the Department of Justice. They concluded that Rule number 1203B2 does not require the Bureau to return to secure custody people on CARES Act if they've been released. So there's a lot of guys that got out on CARES Act. Some of them had more than 10 years still to serve, but they're on home confinement. So, fortunate for them as long as they abide by the rules. And so these are big deals in my view, and they're very encouraging to me. Number 17, the rule holds the phrase that as the director determines appropriate. So it explicitly delegates authority to the director to determine the appropriate amount to lengthen a period of time on home confinement. This is all very encouraging language, because typically the Bureau of Prisons would interpret rules and laws and congressional intent in a manner that had the effective result of keeping people in prison longer. An example was the 54 days a year in good time that people receive up until the ruling of the First Step Act and some other legislation. The Bureau of Prisons used to only give what amounted to, as I think it was like 47 days a year, even though Congress said 54 days. So, there's a lot of people that serve much longer in prison until the First Step Act just because of the BOP interpreted good time. So finally, the OLC concluded that the appropriate action to focus on in determining the meaning of this section is to lengthen the maximum amount of time of home confinement. See, all of this language to me is very encouraging. Number 19, the department's interpretation is also consistent with congressional action demonstrating an interest in increasing the Bureau's use of home confinement. Now, that, of course, again, is for the CARES Act, but that to me is language that I would have interpreted is giving me reason to work harder to make sure I'm a good candidate for success for early release. The department's interpretation, okay, I just read that. Number 20, legislative efforts has been a part of Congress's broader push to manage prison populations and facilitate people's successful reentry into communities. Number 21, as explained below, the Bureau's expert assessment whether a person should remain in home confinement is a decision best made under careful consideration of the appropriate management of Bureau institutions, which includes penological, rehabilitative, public health, and public safety goals, and the totality of the circumstances of individual people. One of the vital tools, this is number 22, of operating a prison system is the ability to effectively manage bed space, so they're asking for that wider discretion. 23, here we get into the costs. The supervision of people on home confinement is significantly lower for the Bureau than locking people up in secure prisons. And then they give some statistics on the cost of confinement, whereas the average cost per day is $108 a day. That's what it was in 2020. It was $121 per day, $107 in 19, $121 in 2020. But to keep somebody on home confinement was less than half that at only $55 a day. Number 24, in the department's view, the aspects of a criminal sentence that preserves public safety can be managed in this context. So they want, again, more discretion, send people to home confinement early. And finally, bullet point number 25, for all these reasons, the department believes that it is not only statutorily authorized, but also operationally appropriate for the director to have the discretion to allow people placed on home confinement under the CARES Act. Now, I will also say that under our subject matter expert page, I'm always interviewing subject matter experts. We recently interviewed the former director of the Bureau of Prisons, Hugh Hurwitz. We hope to expand our interviews with subject matter experts that will help you really understand what you can do to position yourself for the best possible outcome. And I know that many people watching our program are in jail and they're in pretrial and they are trusting their attorneys, but you can't really outsource all of this to your attorney. You've got to be able to do the work yourself on self-advocacy, particularly in this era of the First Step Act. So we'll continue to publish a lot of free content on the prisonprofessors.com website. will, to the extent I've got the time, I'll do the videos, and I will also publish the audio files on our podcast. We encourage you to subscribe to our newsletter so that you can be a part of our community. You could also subscribe to us on iTunes or YouTube. We appreciate you. We believe in you. And we believe in improving outcomes for all justice-impacted people. That is how we strive to be the change that we want to see in the world. I was locked up in those cages for 26 years, and I want to do what I can to help more people emerge successfully. My name is Michael Santos, and on behalf of our entire team at Prison Professors, I believe in you, we believe in you, and we want you to work hard so that you can get out at the soonest possible time. Thanks.